Hello and welcome to Vermont Film Essentials. My name is Lincoln L. Hayes.
And I am David Metzger.
This week, we're off to see the Wizard, the Wonderful Wizard of Oz. I'm so excited to talk about this movie. I love it so dearly. This is actually the first movie that I've seen multiple times, and the first one that I didn't rewatch in preparation for this episode because I know it. I know it backwards and forwards. I have it on Blu-ray, and it's gorgeous, and I just love it so much. I think the first time I saw this was obviously on television. I don't even remember how old I was, but I was a little kid. I think they used to play it on the ABC or something, and I remember just being blown away as soon as we enter Oz and we have the Technicolor, and it's just like, wow! And I think at one point we had recorded it off of TV onto a tape, and I would fast forward through all the Kansas stuff to get to the Technicolor because I was like, sepia, boo! Even though I didn't know what sepia was. And now, the sepia stuff's pretty dope. So,
pretty good.
There's that too. What was your first experience with the old Wizard?
Oh my God, it's the same way, like I can't even, it was just always there.
Yeah.
Like the Wizard of Oz was just always a staple
It was an
in
event.
the house.
I remember when it was going to be on TV, we'd be like, oh, Wizard of Oz is going to be on Sunday, and we would all watch it.
I have a, like driving here, I had this weird, like pretty awful memory, but.
Oh no.
So we watched it in school. Like this movie and E.T. had the same, like, it would scare the crap out of kids.
Oh yeah.
Like the witch would scare the crap out of kids, and then E.T., you know, getting sick and dying would scare the crap out of kids.
And the astronauts coming in their scary suits.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we would watch it. We watched those two movies in school, and there was always the same kid that would sit in the classroom and just like bawl, like cry, and you'd like look over at him, and he's like so scared, like he's biting his nails, like I want to leave, like I can't. And then after we watched the movies, some other event happened and he was crying. Yeah. And I just remember the teacher being like, "You cry a lot."
Oh
and
no.
It's like Wizard of Oz, E.T., like come on. Like
Mean.
and I was like, ugh. And it's one of those things where you look back on it and it's like, oh, like he's going through like years of damage because of that one moment.
That's awful.
but that just flashed in when I was driving by.
Oh,
but
that's so sad.
It's amazing how much, like when I think about it, like there's a lot of movies from 1939, but this one's just always there.
Yeah.
And the legacy that it holds and how much it endures and how many people it reaches, like across the world, not even just in America. It's a pretty amazing feat, especially when you consider the fact that it came out and was just kind of like a come and go thing. Like it came out, it bombed.
Its initial release was pretty poor. It made back its returns, but only just. Right. And then it had a re-release like 10 years later, and that's when it had its resurgence, and that's when everybody was like, oh yeah, this movie's amazing.
And like It's a Wonderful Life, it's because, you know, once a year it's going to be on TV.
Yep.
You get that event behind it, and then all of a sudden it's like, you know, generations upon generations. It's like, you got to sit down, you got to watch this, you got to experience this. Yep. And that was the amazing thing about, you know, at Main Street Landing when we showed this, seeing kids in the audience, and then it was pretty cute. Like there was two kids sitting side by side with their mom, and the tornado happens, and one of the kids is just like, you know, hiding his face, and the other kid's just like, I'm not scared. So.
Adorable.
Just amazing. And it's, you know, it's Robin's favorite movie.
Perfect.
So.
Yeah. I fell in love with this very early on, and then my senior year of high school, we did it as the spring musical, and I got to play the Scarecrow. And my two best friends, Adam and Dusty, were the Lion and the Tin Man, respectively. And it was we were the three seniors in the show that year, and it kind of, in my school, it was, if you were good, you were going to get the lead, and it was just a matter of which year and which show. So, and our director knew that we were the three of us were talented. And he's like, all right, well, you're going to be my three. So I got my first lead sophomore year. Adam got the lead junior year. And Dusty was supposed to be the lead in the musical, but he couldn't do the show. So then senior year, he came back, did the last show with us, and it was Wizard of Oz, which I think at that time was the third time they'd done it at my school, because it's a small school. You got to do crowd favorites. We can't be doing Spring Awakening. We're going to do Wizard of Oz again. Plus, then you can cast all the elementary schools as the Munchkins.
And it's pretty perfect that you have, like when you have three talented actors in class, like there's three main roles for you.
And we had a very talented singer who played Glinda, and our girl who played Dorothy was a year younger than us, and she was great as well. And it was, people still talk about it. I tagged you in a picture on Facebook, and just reading the comments, I was like, wow, this is a diverse group of people who just still think about that show fondly. And it was 15 years ago. And since then, like I've acquired some of the original books. I haven't read them, but I have them in like digital format on the Kindle, and it's kind of been a goal to start collecting some Wizard of Oz stuff along the way. But with Rachel's collecting of Disney stuff and my collecting of Star Wars stuff,
there's no room.
I'm running out of house, so there's not going to be any Wizard of Oz collecting going on yet. But this film is just, it's a triumph for its time. It does so many revolutionary things, and it's another one of the films that we've covered that on paper it shouldn't work. It had 5 directors. It had 14 screenwriters. It went several months over schedule. All of these people were injured or fell ill, or really awful stuff happened in the making of this film. So for it to live on as long as it did is a testament to the original source material, to the performances, and to our man Victor Fleming for making such an iconic, lasting film.
And it's pretty amazing thinking about, and especially watching on the big screen, the degree of how to the left or to the right, how it could have gone the other way. Like, you know, if she got to Oz and then all of a sudden, you know, Munchkin Land was a farce, or like the sets didn't look as well as they do, or the Technicolor wasn't as vibrant as it was, or the people that they got to play the Munchkins was like, you know, off, or people just like looked at it and was like, this is stupid, but I don't know, there's some kind of deal, like Victor Fleming had some kind of deal with the devil of just like, you know, no, it's going to work just because it's a magical land and we're transporting them. And I actually think like that's part of the reason why it endures so much, not only just because of the remarkable storytelling that we'll get into, but that all of the visual effects work in the favor of the audience. It's not just, you know, visual effects for visual effects' sake. It is tied into the story and the storytelling in such a way that you can't help but get sucked up into it. And especially when you have such a strong leading character as you do, and all these different characters that she interacts with, it's all laid out there for you. And you know, the same thing, like, because this movie was always around, there was like a time where it was like, oh, I took it for granted. And then like in high school, I remember, you know, there's the Wizard of Oz Pink Floyd thing, and a couple of friends from high school wanted to do that, and they did it wrong, but that's neither here nor there.
That is a very funny story, though.
So you're supposed to start Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon after the 3rd roar of the MGM lion. However, they took it as when the character of the Cowardly Lion roars 3 times, and they started it there, and they're going through, and they're like, oh my God, look how much this syncs up, and this syncs up, and I'm like, oh man, this is bullcrap. I know it.
You're all completely wrong.
But my friend from high school, like one of them whose copy of The Wizard of Oz it was, like turned to me and was just like, and this, you know, even if without the Pink Floyd, like this is an amazing movie. And I just had to sit back and be like, you know what, it is an amazing movie. And then going into college, I had this screenwriting teacher who opened my eyes to this movie in a screenwriting type of way. That just blew my mind, where he's just like, if you're having trouble with your first act, he's like, okay, so your main character is your Dorothy, so what's your character's over the rainbow? And I'm thinking about it, I'm like trying to figure out, like, what do you mean? Like, I'm not making, like, this isn't a musical. And it's like, no, I'm not telling you have to write a scene where she sings or your character sings. I'm saying, like, what's the thing that she thinks she wants? And that's going to propel her into the second act. And then it's like, what's your Oz? The world that she embarks on in the second act has to be completely different from the world that she's in the first act. So you got to flip it. And if you're having trouble in your third act, it's like, well, what's your character's broom? At the end of the second act, the wizard says you have to get the witch's broom or you're not going to go back home. So what's the journey she has to go on in the third act to figure it all out?
That's a really apt metaphor for screenwriting.
And the more you think about it, the more this film as a screenplay and as a story is a template for anything you want it. Like, if I was teaching a screenwriting class, it would just all be about The Wizard of Oz, and it's like, okay, I'm going to teach you how to structure your screenplay and write your first screenplay just by going through The Wizard of Oz. And it's so amazing how many times it's either like a life raft that just gets you out of a jam, or when you're in the infancy of creating a story, and just by saying, okay, how can I follow this like The Wizard of Oz? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I have the whole structure laid out for me.
It's a yellow brick road.
It's a yellow brick road.
Yeah, how about that?
And so many filmmakers use it, like, David Lynch uses The Wizard of Oz. If you look at Wild at Heart, which, when you think about it, it's like a completely dark, deeply ultra-violent movie. But he has a character playing the Wicked Witch looking into a crystal ball and following the characters. And he uses, like, he alludes to The Wizard of Oz in a very crazy way, even for David Lynch. Scorsese used it in After Hours. Steven Spielberg uses it in, even in Ready Player One, but also, we just talked about Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and, even, Star Wars follows The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
There's very little criticism that you can offer of this film. The performances are all great. Judy Garland is fantastic. The trio are incomparable, and to think of them cast any other way is hard to even process it. Buddy Ebsen was originally cast as the Scarecrow, and Ray Bolger was cast as the Tin Man, but Ray Bolger said he wanted to play the Scarecrow. Buddy Ebsen agreed to switch. And the makeup they used had aluminum powder in it. It got into Buddy Ebsen's lungs, and he nearly died. He was rushed to the hospital, and MGM kept it very quiet, and they're like, oh, it's just, he's fine, and we're going to replace him. And they replaced him. And I cannot think, not Burt Lair. Who plays? Oh, Jack Haley plays the Tin Man. And the funny coincidence with that is my senior year as well, for the fall play, we did Beverly Hillbillies. And Buddy Ebsen played Jed Clampett on the television show, and I played him in the stage version. And then I went on to also do Wizard of Oz the same year, which he would have been in had he not been sick. So I thought that was kind of a crazy coincidence. But that would have been a different film, completely different. I have it in, I normally do just like a couple note cards worth of trivia. I have 2.5 pages. Because
there's a lot of trivia for
there's a lot of trivia for this film. But one of the things in here is Jack Haley's choice of the voice for the Tin Man. He decided to do, that's not his natural voice. He decided to do more of an almost falsetto voice that he said was the same voice he used when he was putting his son to bed at night, when he was like giving him bedtime stories. The same kind of lilty voice that was very calm and soothing and would put him to sleep, which I thought was adorable. And then you have Frank Morgan as, you know, Professor Marvel and the Wizard and all the other roles that he plays. And nobody else could play that part. He's perfect. And of course, Burt Lair's Cowardly Lion.
He's the MVP of this movie. Like
100%. And when you hear how difficult playing the lion was, you're like, oh man, standing ovation for this guy. His costume weighed almost 90 pounds. And it was made from actual lion skins. He couldn't eat food because of his facial apparatus. And he had to drink smoothies and eat soup through straws and everything. And I read that it was so hot in there, it would sometimes get upwards of 100 degrees in the studio because of all the lighting that they had, that it was two people's responsibility at the end of the day to try to dry his costume out because he would just sweat so much. And they have been quoted as saying that his costume just reeked. Because imagine being in 90 pounds of lion for 3 months, just sweating your face off.
And thinking, not knowing like what you're doing or what the impact is going to be of this movie, or if it's going to be any good. And
you're just like, is any of this worth it?
Right. It's like, what am I doing?
I need a gallon of water when I get off the stage every day.
But I mean, you can't. The Cowardly Lion is, you know, not only the comic relief of the whole film, but it's why I kept going back most of the time, because he was so funny. And it's like, you know, oh my God, the lion's coming up, and I love the lion, and I love everything about it, and I love If I Were King. It was just.
That was the one that my sister and I would always sing. That's the song from Wizard of Oz that we would sing. Because he just has so many of his silly moments, and like when he laughs, and he's just, his performance is such a standout in this, like almost surpassing Judy Garland's, which is, at 16, this is what she was capable of. And that's nuts. And to think of how tragic her career and life ended up being, it's just, it breaks your heart to think about it. I mean, we could have an entire episode, and there's a really great podcast called You Must Remember This, which I highly recommend, she's got an episode about Judy Garland, like the Wizard of Oz years, and then Babes in Toyland, and her ultimate, you know, decline into drugs and everything else. And a lot of Hollywood, like, regulations and laws were implemented thanks to and because of actors like Judy Garland, who started out as kids and were just taken advantage of so badly that eventually they're like, we got to protect these kids. If we want them to be in pictures, we got to do something to keep them from getting addicted to pills and, you know, get them an education and all that other stuff. And it's tragic that it had to come about in such a way, but thankfully, you know, kids are safer now because of it.
Yeah, she's, I was thinking, like, especially like watching it on the big screen, she almost has, kind of similar to like when you watch Star Wars and you're like, well, Luke Skywalker he doesn't really do anything.
Yeah.
You know, until the end. And it's like, well, yeah.
That's the point.
That's the point.
Yeah.
You know,
Luke is the Dorothy of Star Wars.
That's the arc. Like he's gotta figure it out, that it's all within himself, and you know, just like you know, at the end, she defeats the witch, but does it just by doing what she knows from back home. Right. If there's a fire, I throw water in it. And then, you know, and just like at the end of Star Wars, it's like, you know, it's impossible to get a shot like that. Well, no, because, you know, back home I used to do that with Wampa Rats.
Yeah.
She has such, she carries the whole film and then has these supporting characters that are all around her. And it's also very excellent the way everything she has to accomplish is represented by the three of them.
Yeah.
You know, she's told in the beginning, she needs to have a brain, she needs to find courage, and she needs to, you know, find her heart, which is where her home is. Right. So everything that she needs to accomplish is represented by these three characters, and as you go along the journey, she's learning through them and watching them, you know, how she can apply it.
Absolutely. And being based on the novel, there's a lot of political satire in there, and I wanted to read this. I just copied and pasted this directly because I was like, well, I can't say it any better than that. The little girl from the Midwest, typical American, meets up with a brainless scarecrow, farmers, a tin man with no heart, industry, a cowardly lion, politicians, in particular William Jennings Bryan, and a flashy but ultimately powerless wizard, technology. Although the little people keep telling her to follow the yellow brick road, the gold standard, in the end, it's her silver, in the original story, slippers, the silver standard, that help her get back to the good old days.
See how amazing it is that just a simple fantasy film can have
Written
such...
in 1898. It still works. That's the other thing that's insane, is this story is now 120 years old, and you could still pick it up and read it and be like, wow, that's right now. That's a timeless story.
And universal, and you don't just have to, it's not just for an American. Like you can.
It's been translated
anywhere.
into countless languages, and it applies all over the world. There's gonna be some little man who needs to go on a journey to learn the power of home and the blessing of home, and how to get back to that. It's a brilliant film, and let's talk about the Technicolor for a second. We start the film in sepia tone, which they shot it in black and white and then painted it sepia for that effect. And then as soon as we get to Oz, it's this brilliant, beautiful Technicolor, which up until that time hadn't really been seen. This was like the first big Technicolor film. And what an amazing reveal. We push out of the cabin into Oz, and it's just like it punches you in the face. It's just like, get ready for color, ha! And the way that they shot that is actually interesting too, and watching it as a kid, you'd never put these together, but with the discerning eye, you're like, all right, that makes total sense. So the way that they shot that was, they were originally going to try this technique where they were going to like recolor it and do all this other stuff, and that proved to be too difficult. So what they ended up doing was having the interior set of the cabin painted sepia tone, and then Judy Garland's double stood in for her with a sepia tone dress and the wig, and did it in such a way that it looked just like her as she's stepping towards the door. But then the camera pushes past her into Oz, and then when we see her again, Judy Garland has stepped in full costume, as she should, and it's just all color. So we're going from black and white stock up until that point, and then it's Technicolor, and they trick you into thinking that they're doing it like within the shot, and it's just set dressing.
And it's done practically.
And it's brilliant. And you'd mentioned the effects and how, they're not done for like superfluous reasons or like, oh, look at all the things we can do. It's treated very much like a stage show where it's like, we need these effects to look real on the day, in the moment, so that the audience will buy it, because we're not going to go back and do anything fancy in post because it's 1939 and you can't. And sure, watching it now, you're like, oh, that's a little cheesy or that's a little hokey, but 1939,
right?
That's cutting edge. That's impressive. What they were able to do with like trapdoors and fire and wires and everything else, it's revolutionary. And because of it, we have Hollywood cinema.
Right. And the only thing that you can really point to is like, obviously the backgrounds are paintings, are matte paintings, and I do think it's like they had a long way to go to figure out how on color to make the matte paintings not look like obvious paintings. But that even, because it's a magical land, it kind of works in its favor, and you buy it just like, you're just like, whatever, it's a painting, but I don't care. It's, it looks
And again, as a kid, you don't know it's a painting.
You don't.
My favorite shot is, I can't remember if it's just Dorothy and the Scarecrow or if it's her and the Tin Man as well. And they're going down the Yellow Brick Road towards the Emerald City, and they get to a point where they can't go any further because they are at the wall, and they just kind of have to take really small steps, and you can see that they're like right up against that backdrop. And every time I see that, I just chuckle, and I'm like, we should have cut like 3 steps earlier. But the song was still going, so they had to get there. And it just made me think of any time on stage when you're waiting for the blackout, and you just have to like hold the moment, and you're just, we're here, we're ready, and anytime you want to black out, please. And that would happen a lot in, you know, rehearsals and tech rehearsals and stuff, where like they're getting all the cues ready, and that would make for some of the like best jokes and stuff within the rehearsal process of just like, well, should we hug? I don't know. And then the lights would black out because they're like figuring out the cues or whatever. Yeah.
You know, it occurred to me that the reason that they start in sepia and go into the Technicolor, it's such a bold artistic choice to do that, to the point where it's like, I'm always trying to like, oh, what's the idea that I'm going to come up with where I can do that, where I can start a film in black and white and go into color. And then like you only get a few steps down thinking that way when you're like, well, that's pretentious, and that just, you know, that's just calling attention to itself, and
Just
you know,
like, man.
you know, it's too much aping The Wizard of Oz. But the reason why they did that was because they knew that the Technicolor was this big, innovative thing. It's like 3D. It's like, you know, whatever technical advancement in film. So let's start the audience with what they know and reveal it in such a way that it has this momentous, like, and here we go into the the new frontier. Similar to like if you can go to Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yeah.
You know, they start with a cartoon as you know it.
Yep.
And then Baby Herman walks out onto the set into the real world, and you're like, oh,
what?
And how are they doing that?
I still don't know how they do that.
It's crazy.
I watch Roger Rabbit now, and I'm just like, how did you do this in 1989?
It still holds up. You know, the other thing about that movie is that, you know, not only is it technically like dazzling and still awe-inspiring, but the casting of Bob Hoskins as the lead character, that is even revolutionary, because he's not, you know, he's not the leading guy.
And he's not a comedic actor at that time either. And he's British.
And he's British.
Yeah.
But for some reason, it's like, you know, if you had like the gorgeous matinee idol, it's like they wouldn't match with the cartoon, or they wouldn't be able to be cartoonish when they needed to be.
Right.
So even that. But then also it hasn't held up too well, but like seeing Avatar in the theater, full 3D with the glasses on, was a crazy, otherworldly experience. And that film, like, you know, he starts it in films as we know it, shot in a real set with real people and real things. Very little CGI work that they've painted in. And then when he puts on the thing and goes into the dream state, or whatever it is, that first moment where he wakes up and he is in that whole world is that.
Yeah.
You know, I think he even alludes to it, like he's like, we're not in Kansas anymore.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, it's the same thing of like, open your eyes into this new world, and we're stepping out of the cabin into Munchkin Land.
But it's like, you know, it's very easy to think like, oh, like all I have to do is start a movie in black and white and turn it into color, and that's okay. It's like, no, what is the, they did that for a specific reason, because that was the technical advancement that they were trying to highlight.
Yeah.
So, you know, our version of doing that is whatever technical advancement we're trying to accomplish.
And really, the only way that you could pull off the black and white into color now is if it actually works narratively in the story, like the character is stuck in some part of their life and it's mundane or whatever, and then they make a decision to get off the train or to go left instead of right, and then all of a sudden that's in color because it's a whole new world for them. That's the only way that it works. And even then, most people are going to point at you and say, you're just ripping off The Wizard of Oz.
Right.
And it's like, ripping off or paying homage? Because it's one of the greatest films ever made, so I kind of think, homage, please? We have Margaret Hamilton as the Wicked Witch. She was a lifelong fan of the books, and when her agent called her to tell her that she'd been offered a role, she was very excited, and she said, which role? And he says, the witch, what else? It's like, thank you? I mean, I also read that she appeared on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood years after the film and actually like put on the makeup and the costume to tell the children not to be afraid of witches because they're not real. And I was like, oh my God. And another tangent, how about the trailer for the Mr. Rogers documentary? I'm gonna lose it.
Oh man, I didn't see that.
Have you not seen it?
No.
David.
Okay.
Whoa.
All right.
Holy cow. I cried watching the trailer. It's gonna be so good. We need more Mr. Rogers in the world. We need more people like that. And if anybody wants me to do it, I will, because that would be amazing.
You could totally do it.
Yeah, let me. I like kids. They're small.
You know what's crazy? Every time I see this movie is, like, it is crazy that the opening of this movie, she shows up and is like, I'm gonna destroy your dog.
Yeah.
And then she's crying crazy tears because they're like, there's a letter from, we can't go against the cops, like we're just
Your
poor
dog has
farmers,
to be
like
destroyed.
and then like takes the dog away. It's like, what?
What is going on right now?
It's just like, this is hard, harsh stuff.
This is a movie for
kids
children.
movie.
We're gonna take your dog and put it down. Huh? And I, as a kid, I gloss over all of that stuff because
Right.
it's like, let's get to the pretty part.
Right.
But yeah, you watch it again, and you're like, Jesus, oof, this is a lot.
It's like watching Back to the Future now, and it's like, oh, Biff is going to sexually assault Lorraine.
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy.
Yeah. And you see her face and how terrified she is, and you're just like, oh, this isn't funny anymore.
Right.
This just got real. Oh, man.
That's another
See-
movie, another Zemeckis movie.
Yeah.
That, you got the 80s real world, and
Yeah.
then he's into the 50s, and
Yeah.
it's like,
That's
the
its
moment
own
where
Technicolor.
the moment where he takes the little scooter and he takes off the thing, and all of a sudden he's got a skateboard. It's
Yeah.
like,
And we have the Wizard of Oz moment in that too, when he steps out of the DeLorean in 1955 and sees how it's all changed and how it's all pristine and clean because it was a bygone age where things were better. And then he has to click his heels 3 times and get back home. Back to the Future is just Wizard of Oz. No wonder I love it so much.
there's so many films that are just the Wizard of Oz. So I was thinking, like, there's a shot of the flying monkeys. The flying monkeys. But there's a shot where the witch is like giving the orders to them, and then the one, jumps out and flies out.
Nico is his name.
Nico. And then, but there's like the matte painting behind, like, and it's crazy how they did it. But like you see a bunch of flying monkeys, like a
Swarm of them.
whole flock of flying monkeys going across. And it occurred to me, like, it's like, oh, the helicopters in Apocalypse Now.
Yeah. And the same kind of underscore to be like, this is, it gets you tense. It gets you like, it's a swarm. It's coming after you. So here's something random. Years ago, I started writing an outline for a direct sequel to Wizard of Oz. Not Return to Oz, but just like the moment Dorothy clicks her heels and goes back to Kansas. And the central conceit of that is that Nico, the head flying monkey, then tries to take over because the witch is gone. So he's like, well, I'm going to take over. And the title that I had was Wizard of Oz 2, The Rise of the Monkeys.
Do you
And
know that
I like outlined it with a recorder, and I was like, these are some of the ideas that I have, and I like just word vomited all of this stuff out, and I still have that sound file somewhere. And someday, when I have the time and the resources to just be like, I'm going to pull this out of a drawer and work on it again.
Well, curiously, apparently, Tim Burton for the longest time wanted to do a Wizard of Oz type, like a Frasier style Wizard of Oz movie, but from the perspective of the flying monkeys, like, and wanted to do that.
That's funny.
And it got into like development hell, and he could never do it. Yeah.
Speaking of Return to Oz, this film is mentioned in the Guinness Book of World Records for, mentioned in the Guinness Book of World Records as the film to which a live-action sequel was produced after the longest time period. Return of Oz, 1985, was released 46 years later. And I also read that Walt Disney, so Disney releases Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It's a huge hit. It's one of the biggest movie of all time for the longest time. And MGM is like, we need a Snow White. We need something. We need to do it. So they bought the rights to the books from L. Frank Baum's estate for $75,000 in 1938, I think, which is a huge sum of money. I mean, that's a ton of money now for book rights, and they did it in the late 30s. And Walt Disney had also wanted to get the rights to it, and MGM beat him out to it. So then they make the film, and then years and years and years later, Disney's able to get the rights so they can do Return to Oz, and then they do The Muppets Wizard of Oz, and then they do the live-action one that came out a couple years ago, The Man from Oz. I forget what that one was called.
The Great and Powerful Oz?
Yes,
Yeah.
that did not do well.
No.
But I just thought that was interesting that like they were going head to head for a while, and then Disney's just like, well, we're still doing great, so we'll just take this while you guys fold. Thank you.
The only thing, I haven't seen The Return to Oz in a long, long time.
It's terrifying.
That's the only thing I remember
It is
about it.
terrifying.
It's weird.
It is the weirdest non-Disney, like this was the time when Disney was making dark, weird live-action movies, like, what is it, The Black Hole, and Something Wicked This Way Comes, and what is the other one? Oh, with Mr. Dark, with Jonathan Pryce. Is that Something Wicked? Yeah, I think so. Oh, I'm thinking of Watcher in the Woods. There's all these dark Disney movies that I never saw growing up because my sister was my movie influence, and if she didn't watch it, I didn't watch it. And then my brother didn't really watch movies, and my parents didn't watch movies. So if she didn't, I didn't see it. But Rachel has seen it, and she's like, it's messed up. But Return to Oz, it's, what's her name?
Fairuza Balk.
Fairuza Balk, who I always call her Veruca Salt, which is not her name. She plays Dorothy. She comes back. There's like a Pumpkinhead. There's the wheelie guys who are on stilts and roller skate around. It's so scary. There's an enchanted like bed that turns into a sleigh. The witch is super scary. Like it's not a good movie. Like you watching, like this is kind of garbage. But if you think about it, watching it through the eyes of a child, you're like, ah!
That's the only thing. Like I was just like, this isn't The Wizard of Oz.
No.
And this is crazy, crazy dark.
Yeah. And the fact that Disney was like, let's do it. Why? Why did that get made? Oh, what else can we talk about? It's so good in this movie. Let's talk about the Munchkins. The majority of them were Jewish immigrants fleeing the Nazis in Europe. Which makes complete sense. And I never even would have put those two together until I read it and was like, well, yeah, that makes total sense. There is one surviving Munchkin. His name is Jerry Morin, I believe. And he is 98 years old. Jesus. Yeah, Jerry Morin. He was a member of the Lollipop Guild. He also said that making the film was not fun. It was no fun at all. It was hell, and it was hard work. They were working 6 days a week, which is surprising because the Munchkin Land sequence isn't even that long.
Right.
But you got to think about all the angles and the takes, and you know, we got directors coming and going, and we're doing rewrites and everything else. Again, this film should not have worked. It should have just like, this is the kind of movie on paper that like the sets should have been falling down while they were filming it. This should have ended up on Mystery Science Theater as like, what is this garbage? Instead, it's incredible. It's got songs that you will still sing, and the various iterations of what they were going to do with the script and how they were going to take it and make it darker. They were going to make it more vaudevillian and farcical and all this other stuff, and they ultimately were like, no, let's just stick with what's in the book and just kind of enhance it. And they did it admirably. The biggest cut of the film is the jitterbug number, which is actually still on the stage version. And I remember when we were doing the show, we would all get to that scene and go, why is this in here? It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't fit.
No. Like, it's tonally different, and there's this song about Toad the Woad, and it's just weird.
Robin, when I told Robin that that there's like this long lost like musical sequence that is called the Jitterbug, and she's just like, even by the name, you know it doesn't fit.
Right.
I don't see them doing a jitterbug.
Right. It also would really date the film because the jitterbug was popular in the 20s.
Right.
And this is already almost the 40s. So that would be like, I don't know, putting a disco number in something now. You're just like, what? Why? That's antiquated. So they cut that out. This film was originally much, much longer. There was one screening that had all the stuff in it, and then they trimmed it down and trimmed it down and eventually got to the 112-minute mark. And that's where they kept it, and they're like, we're not doing anything else. They talked about adding some stuff in with the subsequent re-releases, which they've done like 1,000 of them, which is this. This is probably like the 98 version. I don't know.
Yeah.
They do a new release every few years when the restoration technology is that much better. Like mine is a 4K resolution Blu-ray, and even the sepia tone, like you look at it and you're like, wow, this has depth. This is, like you can see stitching. It's so clear.
So much detail that you pick up on. And there's like there's a scene where, so they get the orders that they got to go and get the witch's broom, and then they're all walking, and they all have these weird, they all have these weird weapons that they got from somewhere. Some
Right?
deleted scene. The Scarecrow has a gun. I don't know where he got a gun, but he has a gun.
Why does he have a
I
gun?
don't know why he has a gun. The Tin Man has a big wrench, even though he's got an axe
already.
And then the Lion has a pest sprayer.
Yeah.
And it was only on the big screen that it's like Robin and I were just like at the same time, and we were just like, or no, she said it. She's like, it says
Witch repellent.
yes. You're like, I never noticed that.
Yeah, and then it's just gone. It disappears.
It just disappears.
And in a cut scene, I read that the Lion pulls it out and he's like, "Oh, I got this witch repellent." And the Scarecrow's like, "No, you can't use that." And he takes it and he throws it away. And as it hits the ground, it vanishes. I was like, "What?
What?
This doesn't make any sense." I actually have that in my note that the Scarecrow has a pistol, and I remember watching it too and just being like, "Where did he get a gun?"
And we didn't establish that that was a thing that happens in Oz, that you can just throw things
here?
and it disappears. Yeah,
Yeah.
why? That was the weirdest thing. And I don't even think I ever noticed the Scarecrow with a gun. And Robin and I were watching it one time, and she's like, "Does the Scarecrow have a gun?" And I'm like, "Yeah." Why? Yeah, it's weird.
You know, scarecrows are usually armed
Right.
in Oz, apparently. Well, I'm going to read through some of this because there's so much in here that talks about the changes from the novel and accidents on set and just so many things that you're like, oh my God, this movie. Frank Morgan plays the Wizard and Professor Marvel. They wanted him to look like moth-eaten when he's Professor Marvel. So they bought a bunch of coats secondhand and went through them. They're like, oh, this one. So he puts it on, and they're on set, and he reaches into the pocket, and he finds a label, and he pulls it out, and it says, L. Frank Baum. The coat was made for Baum in Chicago.
Wow.
And then given to a secondhand shop. And after the production, like they contacted his widow and was like, is this his? And she goes, oh, yeah, that's his. We must have donated it after he died or something. And they gave it back to her, which I thought was great. Many of the Wicked Witch scenes were trimmed or cut because they were deemed too scary, which is fair because even now, that is a scary, scary cackle she's got. Over the Rainbow was almost cut.
Wow.
Because the studio thought it went over the kids' heads. And there was a reprise of it when she's trapped in the witch's castle that was entirely cut. And that one I read that she actually sang live on the set. She must have had an earwig in so she could hear it or something, but she was able to sing it live. And it was so emotional that the crew were crying. And I think that there's a bunch of stuff in that sequence, like from getting to the castle and fighting the witch and getting back to the wizard, that if you pay close attention to it, there's a lot of inconsistencies because a bunch of scenes were just taken out and like, well, we can put these two together and it'll be fine. When the witch tries to remove the ruby slippers when she first gets to Oz and there's the fire, it's actually dark apple juice that was sprayed out at her hands and then it was sped up to look like fire. Apple juice. I'll have to remember that one. Hey, we need fire.
Apple juice.
Apple juice. Judy Garland had to wear a corset to appear younger, as she was 16 at the time, and it was very, very uncomfortable. The prosthetic that Ray Bolger, Scarecrow, wore on his face to give the impression of burlap left such an impression on his skin that it took more than a year for the burlap pattern to completely fade from his skin.
God.
which I'd be like, oh my god, no thank you. Mine was just yellow paint. Worked out dandy. The horses in the Emerald City were colored with jello crystals, and the scenes had to be shot quickly because they were licking it off. Horse, stop licking yourself. It's jello. Everybody loves jello.
And it didn't hurt the horses. Right?
No. Although the irony of it, gelatin is made from horse hooves. Glinda kisses Dorothy on the forehead, which protects her from harm from the witch, which is in the book but not mentioned in the film. So it's just kind of one of those things that, like, because of that kiss, nothing can happen to her. She's going to be fine. But we don't know that as an audience. It's just kind of like, if you know the story. This I thought was fascinating. So the character of Dorothy is named for Baum's niece, who died at only 5 months old. She was buried in Bloomington, Illinois in 1898, and her grave was forgotten until 1996. When Mickey Carroll, one of the last surviving Munchkins, learned of this, he offered to make her a new grave marker through his monument company. It was dedicated in 1997, and the children's section of the cemetery was renamed the Dorothy L. Gage Memorial Garden in, quote, in hope that the bereaved families would be comforted in thinking that their lost children as being with Dorothy from the Wizard of Oz. I was just like, oh man, that's really nice. Also, in the original book, her name is Dorothy Gage, and then in subsequent stories, she's Dorothy Gale. So he changes it after the first novel. This was crazy, and I can't believe I didn't know this. The snow in the poppy field was 100% industrial grade asbestos, despite the known health risks at the time. They're just like, yeah, fine. Just dump a bunch of asbestos on them. No wonder everybody was sick and dying on this movie.
You care about this movie, don't you?
Get out there in those poppies. I mentioned Burt Lair's costume. The carpet in front of the ruby slippers at the Smithsonian Institute has had to be replaced many, many times due to wear and tear from their popularity. I've been to the Smithsonian. Did I go to the Smithsonian? I don't think I did. I went to the Air and Space Museum, but I don't think I went to the Smithsonian, and that would be something I would definitely want to see. It's also crazy that in the story, her slippers are silver, and they turn them red for the film because obviously that's makes more of a pop. I also read that in the dream sequence, when Dorothy's looking out the window and she sees Gulch transforming into the witch and back and forth, if you look, she's wearing the slippers on the broom, which means that that's actually not the Wicked Witch of the West. It's the Wicked Witch of the East. But that's never explained or pointed out to the audience. And I read that and I was like, whoa, now I need to watch that again. The female voice that sings Wherefore Art Thou, Romeo, during the Tin Man song is Adriana Casaletti, the voice of Snow White. That was neat. Munchkins were paid $50 a day for a 6-day work week, and Toto was paid $125 a week. There were 2 Totos. One of them got injured. Somebody stepped on him, I think, and then they had to get a replacement Toto. And Judy Garland actually spent a few weeks living with the dog so they could get acclimated to each other. And then after they wrapped filming, she loved him so much that she wanted to adopt him, but his owners were like, no, he's ours. Surrender Dorothy, which I think you can see right here, in fact, was created by, it's the same thing they did in Close Encounters. It's a tank full of water, a hypodermic needle full of milk that they shot from underneath, and then they just did it backwards. Who thinks of this stuff? Who's like, you know what we could use? Milk. This is actually something that I've known about for a very long time. Margaret Hamilton was very badly burned in the scene when she leaves Munchkin Land, when the trapdoor opens and the smoke comes out. Her makeup was copper-based. So the flame went off too soon, caught her on fire, and then she's got makeup on her hands and face. It's copper-based. It caused 2nd and 3rd degree burns. And to remove the makeup, they had to use a strong solvent, acetone, which was extremely painful, as you can imagine. I mentioned Buddy Ebsen cast, but had to leave because of an allergic reaction to the aluminum dust in his makeup. But his vocals remain in We're Off to See the Wizard. That's him singing the Tin Man's part. And in the extended version, If I Were King of the Forest. Nico, the head flying monkey, was named for the Japanese town where the Hear No Evil, See No Evil, Speak No Evil shrine is. I thought that was really neat. And if you've ever read the novel, you know that it's a lot darker than the film because it's a family film. It's for kids. But in the novel, there's a lot more violence. The Tin Man chops off the head of wildcats and 40 wolves. Bumblebees sting themselves to death on the Scarecrow. And the wizard ordered them to kill the witch, not just retrieve her broomstick. So imagine that movie. That'd be a little bit different. The tornado effect was accomplished by a 35-foot muslin stocking spun around in the miniatures.
Again.
Guys, you're so good at this.
What's crazy about the tornado sequence is, one, like that in a theater, like in the big screen with like the loud surround sound, was like earth shaking, like crazy. Like this is awesome.
That
like,
might
I've
also be
never
why
seen
I'm
this.
afraid of tornadoes.
Well, yeah, it's scary. But that tornado is better than the tornadoes that are in Twister.
Of course
I've
they
said
are.
that. Like it's it looks like a real tornado that is coming towards them, even though you know it is rear projection. Like it's like it's a real tornado, and yeah, it's just amazing.
In a cutscene at the end of the film, Hunk, who plays Scarecrow, is going away to agricultural college, and Dorothy promises to write him, solidifying the budding romantic relationship between the two in the film, which always struck me as inappropriate. I don't know how old the farmhands were, but they always seemed like they were in their mid to late 20s, and she was a child.
What?
The farmhands.
Yeah.
How old do you think they were?
Well, no, but I mean,
A
they were supposed
cutscene.
to have a
Hunk was going to go off to college, and she's like, I'll write you. And he's like, okay. But like you see it kind of budding between her and the Scarecrow throughout the film. Of like they're getting close.
Right.
Too old to begin the training. I thought this was really funny. A reviewer named Rick Polito from Marin Independent Journal in Northern California is famous for his one-sentence film reviews, and his review of Wizard of Oz is this. Transported to a surreal landscape, a young girl kills the first person she meets, then teams up with 3 strangers to kill again.
You cynical
Poop.
critic.
40 million people watched the first televised version on November 3rd, 1956. The ruby slippers were so uncomfortable that she only wore them in the takes when they were needed. The day of Judy Garland's death, there was a tornado in Kansas. It took 14 writers and 5 directors to make this film. The steam that comes out of the Tin Man's hat during If I Only Had a Heart is talcum powder, which you'll notice doesn't dissipate, it falls. We talked about the Scarecrow having a gun for no reason. MGM originally wanted to use their lion as the lion in the film and dub a voice. And then they're like, let's cast a person. And lastly, the horses of a different color wagon once belonged to Abraham Lincoln.
That's cool. See, I was worried because this is one of those films not unlike Singing in the Rain, where it's like the less I know about the behind the scenes stuff,
The more
the
magical
better.
it
It's like I don't want to take away from, but you really can't. I mean, there's like a built-in innocence about this movie that just works, and like, you know, like we've been saying, like any other movie or the end where she's like, "There's no place like home," and the credits like you'd just be like, "Oh, come on, really?" But it just works.
You're just like, yes, it's true.
And I, you know, that opening, you know, whatever the scroll that's at the beginning, where it's just like, "This is for the young at heart," and like it's like, okay, I'm going to shut something off.
Cynical brain, shut off. Let's just love it.
And it doesn't take long before you just are. And you know, and part of it might be the nostalgia thing of like, you know, it was always around, and it's just there, and it works.
It's a chicken soup movie.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, Wizard of Oz is on. Let's watch it.
And it's weird, for as many songs as there are in it, like I always forget that it's a musical.
Yeah.
Like, I never think of it as a musical.
The songs come up and you're like, this makes sense.
Right.
All right, well, we're going to wrap it up here, and fitting that we talk about There's No Place Like Home. Next week will be my final episode on Film Essentials. The wife and I will be moving back to New York City. Our friend Devin will be replacing me here on the show. this has been the highlight of my week for the last year or so. And I'll miss it a lot. David and I are talking about doing a podcast so that we can continue to talk about films together, because this is the best. I love this so much, which is why next week is Star Wars, my favorite movie, because David is the best. But it's time.
I need to make a correction to what he's saying, because Devin is not replacing him, because he's not able to be replaced. Devin will be, the show will be different. It won't be this, but it'll be something different, neither better nor worse. But this, like he's saying, this was highlight of my week, and before this show happened, me sitting here talking on camera never would have been a thing.
Go back and look at the first few episodes. He's got a script.
I'm like,
He's sitting like this, and you've come into your own, and because of it, we have projects that we're going to work on. We have ideas for things, and we're able to look at these films that have been so important to us and move forward together as collaborators to work on things down the road. And I'm so looking forward to that. Even though we're going to be, back in the city, we still have projects that we want to do. We're going to do the podcast. We're going to stay in touch, and we're going to, if you'll let me, I'll send you stuff and contribute to the show. And
absolutely.
Devin's going to be great because you guys have such a good dynamic, and he brings so much to the table with his knowledge of film, his encyclopedic knowledge. The two of you are like Encyclopedia America and Britannica.
It may be too much.
It's going to be a lot of nerding out, and it's going to be really fun to continue to watch the show with the two of you and to bring in the guests and everybody that we have. And I'm really looking forward to next week, but I'm also dreading it because it's going to be hard, as this is hard right now, and there's nobody in the room. But thank you all for watching. This has been the best part of the 3 years that I've been here. So thank you all. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for being a part of it. And thank you, David.
Thank you.
For going on this journey. Thank you, VCAM. Thank you, Bill, for the idea to do this. We were just going to do this on the radio and shoot it with a couple cameras.
And I was fine with that.
And you were like, I can do that. And then Bill said, well, why don't you just put it out on VCAM too, and then put the audio out on the radio? And we're like, wait, that's even better.
And I'm like, all right.
So we've been able to do this show that I have loved so very much, and I'm sad to be leaving it, but I'm excited to see what it becomes in the next iteration.
And what we do in the future, because New York City is not China. It's not crazy far away.
In the next film that he has, he needs shots in New York. And it's like, all right, well, I got a couch you can sit on. So we're going to still do stuff, and it's going to be great. It's just going to be a ways away. So thank you, sir. This has been the best. I love it so much. And next week is going to be so much fun. I cannot wait. Sorry for crying. I'm an emotional person. And it's been a stressful month, guys. So, until next time, I'm Lincoln Oates.
I'm David Metzger.
We'll see ya.